Well, welcome everybody to this wonderful reminiscence about what we all in Northfield recall as the metric game or the metric football game. We have got people here from both sides of the equation, the town, representing Carleton, two to my left, and representing St. Olaf, two more to my right. And we're going to cover the story of this remarkable game that took place on September 17th, 1977 at Laird Stadium. Coincidentally, the stadium was close to filled that day. Laird Stadium, it's rumored, holds about 10,000 people, give or take. Sometimes those wooden bench seats were in ill repair and you maybe couldn't get about 10,000 and maybe 9,500. But it was near capacity filled that day, and it's only been filled 3 times. Once in 1935 when it was built, once in 1952 when Dwight David Eisenhower was on a whistle-stop tour and stopped in Northfield and gave a speech at Laird Stadium on the Carleton College campus. And the 3rd time is the metric football game, September 17th, 1977, and I'm proud to say I was present at 2 out of the 3. 1935 would have been a little difficult for me to make it because I wasn't born for 5 more years. I think at this point in time we'll start to my left, your right, and start with the introductions, starting with Jerry Mohrig. If you would let us know who you are and your connection to the game, Jerry.
Sure. Jerry Mohrig. I taught chemistry at Carleton for 36 years, coming in 1967, and I guess the idea was first promoted by me of having a metric football game.
And I'm Jack Thurnblad. At the time of the metric game, I was the director of men's athletics. I came to Carleton in 1960 and retired in 1989. The metric game was one of a kind. It was the first one to be played, and as for my knowledge, I think there hasn't been another one played anywhere.
Certainly not sanctioned.
Right.
Well, Jack, thanks so much. And then going to my right.
I'm Bob Phelps, and at the time of the metric game, I was the information director at St. Olaf. Came to St. Olaf in 1969 and retired in 1994.
Okay.
I'm Tom Porter. I was the head football coach at St. Olaf then. I came in 1958, retired in 1991. So this was during my era of coaching.
So, we have many of the protagonists, not all of them. It would be wonderful if we could get everybody here, but space limitations and just pure numbers got us to whittle it down to the 4 people who we have introduced to you. My name is Dan Freeman, if I didn't say so in the beginning, and I broadcast the game over KYMN radio in Northfield. And thanks to Jerry, I had a conversion chart so I could actually tell what was going on as far as the weights and the distances were concerned. Without that, I would have been totally lost. So that's my area of expertise, which I'll talk to later on. Jerry, starting with you, since that's the germ, that's when it all began, why don't you let us know how it all came about?
It started, the germ of the idea was first brought forth around the Mohrig's dinner table in the early spring of 1977. My 15-year-old son, David, was an avid reader of Sports Illustrated. And those were the days when swimming had just gone metric, and track had gone metric. Metric was in the air. It looked like the nation was going to go metric. And one evening at dinner, he said, "Dad, why doesn't Carleton play metric football?" Because there was a little column in Sports Illustrated talking about swimming, and they said it'd be fun to try football that way too. That was the germ of the idea in that spring. And he said, why don't you try to get Carleton to play metric football? And I thought, well, maybe. Okay. And the next part of the story is when Jack Thurnblad and I were in line at the Carleton commencement in our gowns, waiting to march in to commencement, and something had delayed things. And I happened to be standing next to Jack. And so we were making conversation, and I thought, well, a crazy idea, but why not? So I said to Jack, can I try out an idea on you? He said, yeah. And I said, well, why don't we have a metric football game between Carleton and St. Olaf? At that time, Carleton was in the Midwest Conference, and St. Olaf was in the NIAC, so it wasn't a league game. Why not give that a try? That would be fun. And we talked about it a bit, and Jack was always the consummate gentleman, and he said, oh, yeah, that's an interesting idea. I said, could I write you a memo, put it in words? And he said, sure. So I went back to my office after commencement and wrote a memo. And I had the good sense to send a copy of it to Harriet Sheridan, who was the president of Carleton that year. The next day, a note came back from Harriet saying, Jack, make it so. And the story goes on to Jack.
Yeah, Jack, you are the ball's now in your court.
Well, you know, Jerry mentioned that to me when we were in line, as he said, at the commencement. And I could hardly sleep that night thinking about all of the options, all of the ramifications. And to me, I couldn't think of anything negative. It was kind of a win-win situation from the get-go. So, and even if I hadn't thought that way, once I got the note from the president of the college to make it happen, I thought I was, you know, under a direct order. But that's really not true. Anyway, it was the more we kept thinking about it, and we had to. Our team was having a poor season, actually, and I'm forever indebted, by the way, that this game happened to another person, and that's to Tom Porter. All he had to do was say no, and we would never have been able to play the game. And for Tom and for St. Olaf, perhaps they didn't have near as much to gain from such a game as we did. So, gentleman that he is, and sportsman that he is, he agreed to the challenge, and we both were kind of flying blind on this thing because no one had ever played a metric game. But I'm telling you, all kinds of things happened. We got publicity that you wouldn't believe on radio, on TV, the New York Times, the Chicago Tribune, the Los Angeles, whatever it is, Times, Sports Illustrated, and it just mushroomed, and thankfully it took a lot of the emphasis off of 43-0 defeat that we had. It was kind of, and not only that, but it lent a whole different twist to our campus, to our football team, to the coaches, and it was a welcome deviation from what would normally happen during the week prior to a football game. And I'm sure you'll hear a lot more about it today, but that was basically our general reaction.
There were more hurdles, though, and
yes.
Probably we should start with the NCAA.
Yes, we had to get permission through the NCAA, which required a phone call by me to NCAA headquarters. We hashed it out. They didn't give an immediate reply. They said, we'll think about it and call you back. And their main concern was that the metric statistics of the game would be converted to our regular uniform way of compiling statistics. And they gave permission to have the game. So that was one of the hurdles. Mm-hmm. There were other hurdles like, you know, we had to realign the field to turn out to be what would be maybe 109 yards long and what, maybe 53 yards wide, some fraction of that nature. Which, when you think about that, I think that added to the potential in a football game. It could spur more running, wider field to run in, more passing, more field to pass in, more field to cover for the defense. Kicking is another factor, both punting and place kicking. So all of those things entered into the picture.
Well, I've got another question that isn't down on paper, but you should be able to comment on. Was the boss, the groundskeeper, Tom Gillespie, who was a classmate of mine in high school, did he go along with the plan readily?
Oh, Tom was very cooperative, and you never wanted to make Tom mad because he had forearms like Popeye, so we got along real good.
Yeah, he was a character.
Yes.
And a great team member.
The only thing that wasn't done is the goalposts were not raised.
Okay.
That's right.
Yes.
So they were still in English instead of metric.
They were in feet and inches. How did George Dane get involved? He was in the publicity department and some media department at Carleton during those years, and he certainly brought a fresh eye and voice to this situation.
Well, he had just arrived at Carleton in the early summer of 1977, brand new. And he was in charge of college relations, I think we called it in those days. And when he heard of this idea, I think I called him up and told him about it. It was a publicist's dream. And he's a very creative guy, and he simply ran with it. He really did. So a lot of the publicity came about because of what he did, I think.
And we were talking earlier, and he really had that air, kind of a buoyant personality. And what did you say about him that he would have made a hit?
Great used car salesman.
Okay, so you get the picture of how enthusiastic and taking on a task like this. You're right, it had to be a dream, but I'm sure along the way there were plenty of bumps as well. We had heard that the NCAA did balk at certain things. Was the only part the conversion?
That seemed to be their major concern, unless Jerry had some input on that, was the statistics of the game so that it would fit in with the Division III football.
Okay, so once that was answered, the NCAA said, okay.
That's right.
Okay. Okay, now, switching to the west side of town and to my right, and you can take that anywhere you want to, Tom. How were you approached about the game, and what was your reaction to the idea? We've heard Jack say that you came along, but what went through your mind, honestly?
Well, that's a few years ago, so maybe my recall isn't that sharp, but realizing that that all the work and preparation was going to be on Carleton's part. We weren't really adverse or against it from that standpoint. That we thought a little bit about the dimensions of the field and whatever, and that we didn't think it would make too much difference in playing or preparation for it. We thought probably the one area might be in the kicking game where you would be maybe punting a little more frequently because of the extended yard to gain. But we had always put quite a bit of emphasis on the kicking game, and that didn't seem to be a problem. I might reflect back a little bit on Jack's comments about the NCAA concern. They were concerned with the possibility, of having several new records of say, a kickoff return or a punt return for maybe 110 yards or 110 meters, you see, and they would have the possibility anyway of records that would exceed the ones that were in the book with a regular 100-yard field. And this didn't occur, but that was just an example of one of their concerns, and the requirement on their part to refigure everything in the yards and that in reporting statistics to them following the game.
I hadn't thought about that, but yes, that would definitely be a possibility. Well, Bob Phelps was in the media department at St. Olaf, the counterpart of where George Dane was doing in Carleton. And you got word that the teams wanted to do this, and what did that prompt you to do from St. Olaf's standpoint?
Actually, the way it happened was that George called me, George Dane. I don't think we can give George enough credit for how this thing unfolded. And he had somewhat of an advantage because, as I recall it, George came from an advertising or PR firm, or at least he had that kind of background. So he had also some contacts that those of us around here didn't have. And I think that helped a lot in the media barrage that came about as a result of this. So we got together, I think we had lunch at the Rubenstein, as a matter of fact. And George and I had a very good working relationship. It was young at that time because, as Jerry said, he was new to Carleton. But it grew as we got to know each other, and this was a good way to get our feet wet together, so to speak, because we did coordinate news releases and the publicity.
Well, shifting again back to Carleton for a moment, it seemed as though the director of U.S. Bureau and Standards was asked to come and throw out the first ball or measure the first 10.9 yards or something, and he was not able to make it, but you did finally find someone. Tell us about that.
Jack, do you know?
I'm not sure of that, no.
Okay.
George must have arranged it.
All right.
Yeah, I
Well,
have
it's
no
a
recollection of that.
gentleman by the name of David Dye from the Minnesota Metric Commission. You know, that's going to lead me to another question, Jerry, that I was going to ask you sooner or later, so let's do it sooner. All this emphasis on converting from yards and inches and pounds to meters and centimeters and kilograms was going to come about. And I mean, that's the time they start putting the metric miles per hour on cars during that time.
Kilometers.
Kilometers per hour. And so here we are. It's 2008. This was 1977. All this was going to come out about. What do you think happened? Or didn't?
Well, let's go back a minute.
Okay.
Metric system came into being in about 1790 by the French. The English didn't like the French Revolution, and they weren't about to have anything to do with this. And we went along with what England thought. So we used English measurements. And as the rest of the world went to metric, as I remember in 1977, there were only 3 nations in the world that had not gone metric. 2 of them were the United States and Burma. And the other one, I think, was Burundi. I'm not positive about that. But the rest of the world had simply gone metric. There was no doubt about it. And you read articles in the newspapers that how were we going to compete in world trade? All of the instruments, all of the machines were being made metric in the rest of the world. We couldn't only use English measurements and sell our things abroad. We had to compete with the rest of the world, and we were the loner. And so there was a big push to be metric at that time. And of course, the scientists had used metric for probably since the early part of the 19th century, so it was perfectly normal. As you said, there were road signs in kilometers. It was becoming commonplace to use it. And the notion that one always had to convert from feet and inches or pounds to metric units was nonsense once you started using it. It's much simpler, like our decimal money system. So that was in the background. And that's why I thought, hey, this is a neat idea to do. At that point, I had delusions of grandeur and thought that Carleton and St. Olaf might play a liter bowl every year. And I had an old evaporating dish that was at Carleton when I got there, probably from the 1920s. And we wrote it and called it a liter bowl. And this was the first liter bowl game. Well, it became the only liter bowl game, as it turned out. But that changed very quickly after the election of 1980, and all of a sudden it wasn't American to become metric, and we stopped talking about it. And it went away. Although American industry, in order to sell abroad, switched to metric measurements. They just simply did.
Right, and both are on packaging now.
That's right.
In the United States, probably nowhere else.
Yep.
You know, Dan, I want to say that it was an interesting event, and there were many ramifications of the event. For example, our football team's morale was low. They were struggling, and you know, it's always a lot more fun to win athletically than it is to lose. And we were having a losing season, and this kind of put a whole new window in our frame. So the students went bananas over it. As you have seen, they were all wearing, Jerry even had a sweatshirt that said Meter Man, and they had his picture. Where's yours, Jerry?
Here we go.
There it is.
There it is.
There's the Meter Man. And the students were all wearing these T-shirts and carrying meter sticks, and you know, the T-shirt said drop back 10 meters and punt and things like that. And so that kind of gave a whole new emphasis and changed the mental outlook, not only for the football team, but for our whole campus. And it was a shot in the arm, so to speak, for the campus and for the college. And we were getting phone calls and telegrams. Even former President Larry Gould, who at that time was now down at Arizona, called me long distance, and he was ecstatic. He thought it was one of the greatest things that ever happened. So, you know, thinking about all the things that had to happen to make the game happen makes me wonder how it ever happened. So it was great.
Well, I think the inertia was so complete in everybody wanting to make it happen that once you got rolling, you didn't dare stop because so many people would be disappointed. Would you say that's fair, Jerry?
Yes. I think it's the only time I can remember in my 36 years at Carleton when students had bonfires before the game the night before. They were really into this, very, very much so. Well, they had that campy kind of humor that just fit, and then we played the game and got serious again.
Well, I was looking at some of the clippings that Susan Vistendahl prepared for us, and there in a prominent place is a former waitress of mine when I owned a Rubenstein with a drop back 10 meters and punt t-shirt on. So I once again remembered that, and you're right, the buzz was all over town, and I think in sports rooms probably across the country they were thinking about how to cover this team. And as we'll hear in a little while, many publications, many television and radio stations covered it. So going back to Tom, you touched on this a little bit about the metric field and the layout of it. But I think it ended up not making much of a difference in the game and how the game was played. Would you say that's a fair?
I think you're correct,
statement?
Dan, and that I made reference and Jack made reference to the idea of a little more space for, say, the kicking game or any wide game, whether it be passing or run or whatever. But once we were on the field, as I recall, that you really didn't realize any difference in the dimensions of the game or whatever. It was a football field. And I think your preparation, and once the game started, that the emphasis and the focus was on playing the game on that field, and the markings were sort of incidental.
Right. Jerry, you know, you can make a comment here about the exact difference. Could you compare the original field with the metric field for us?
About 3 inches in a yard. I think a meter is 39 inches, a foot in a yard is 36. So it's just a little bit more, not quite 10% more, 9%.
And so the difference would have been, instead of going 10 yards for a first down, you had to go nearly 11.
Yes, that's right.
Okay. And then how about the width?
I think it was made 53 meters instead of 53 feet, if I'm not mistaken, unless we stopped at 50 meters.
I think it was the way they...
I've seen it both in the articles.
Well, then probably the average person walking into the game would not have known unless they had been told.
Let me tell one story. Before the game, I went up to the press room to see what was going on up there and talk to people. And the announcers were saying, "Oh, this is going to be an impossible game to call. How are we going to convert back and forth all the time? We can't handle that." And I just smiled, didn't say anything, walked out. It was a piece of cake for them, because you simply have to look at the ground and see, okay, that's 10. Well, this then is 2 more to go. Well, it happens to be not yards, but meters instead of 2. So it was a piece of cake for them, I think, to call the game. Because you didn't have to go back and forth. It was all laid out for you. But they were worried.
Oh, yeah.
By halftime, they weren't worried at all.
Yeah. Well, I was.
Yeah.
I just wanted to get, I had to get a ruler so I could go across the page. That was my big request, is somebody got a ruler here so I can keep all these weights and heights and separated from each player to each player. Going back to you, Tom, with you were quoted as saying, before the game, that you thought the kicking game might be necessary more often with the wider field. In reality, did that end up making any difference?
No, I don't believe so, Dan. We used to make a diagrammatic chart of the game progress in that. And I don't see, as I look back and look at some statistics, I don't think that either ourselves or Carleton punted an unusual number of times. So I would say that it made very little, if any, difference.
In the entire game of any sort, do you remember anything unique to the field contributing?
Well, I remember sort of tongue-in-cheek talking to the officials before, and I said, have you practiced your steps, your measurement, so that you can mark off 5 meters or 10 meters instead of yards? And then I also said, well, you probably will earn your paycheck a little bit more today because you're going to have to run a few yards more. But those are...
We just hired math majors for the game.
Jack, he would probably remember the game. This was Don Wheeler and Jim McGinty and a crew that had worked a number of games that we had played, and they were enthusiastic about it because being a part of the occasion.
Well, there haven't been any more occasions, so they made history, as it turns out, which is what we're talking about today. The game played out. We've alluded to the fact that St. Olaf won the game 43-0. They were out front at the end of the first quarter by 13-0. At the half, it was 22-0, and the final was 43-0, as I just said. But perhaps some interesting pieces of information. I have them right here in front of me. St. Olaf ended up with 302 meters in yardage, in meterage, And that turned out to be 330 yards. Carleton made 106 meters or 116 yards. That was all rushing yardage. Carleton had no passing yardage whatsoever that day. Well, getting back to our questions, we've got the atmosphere. You've kind of referred to that. I see the next question is about the atmosphere of the game. But get specific, Jerry and Jack, here. I'll let you two kind of bounce it around. On top of the fact that you've shown those T-shirts, which were kind of small things that got people going, but it got going much greater, I think, than at least I anticipated it was going to. And the cheerleaders, and then what were the names of people you were talking about? Harmon Kilogram.
Oh, yes.
And those...
Metricized everything.
Yes.
Yeah. Well, I should have done that with hamburgers at the Reuben Center.
But then you'd have to change the price. You'd be giving more meat.
Oh, no. We could have given them a deal for one day.
Ah.
But you talk about the campus, the bonfires, the energy, the Carletonian, and jumping in with all the articles.
Well, I think students felt they were part of a unique experience. Mm-hmm. And it turned out that was true, because it was the only one. But they were making history, if you will. The fact that the game had gotten a lot of publicity, they'd seen a lot of that publicity, made them want to participate. Mm-hmm. And I think probably a lot of St. Olaf students came over, I would guess. I don't think the Laird Stadium would have been filled otherwise. Exactly. So it permeated both campuses to some extent. Was that true? Were the St. Olaf students into the game as much as Carleton students?
Probably not as much because it was at Laird Stadium, but yeah, I think that's fair to say.
You know, we never dreamed that this thing would become nationwide, and it energized certainly our student body and the football team, and it just kind of put a whole new emphasis on the game, which I was very thankful for, because you know, as I alluded to earlier, it had been a dismal season, and it was a spark that energized our entire campus.
What about, did you do anything unusual at halftime, Jerry? Do you remember?
I went out and I must have said something. I guess it wasn't memorable. I don't remember. But I do remember what Carleton's brand new president, Bob Edwards, said. My wife and I sat on the 50-meter line with the Edwards, and I don't remember the score at halftime, but it must have been high 30s.
22-0.
22-0. Bob Edwards was a very tall man, and he got up and he stretched, and he said, "De-emphasis of athletics is one thing, but this is ridiculous." Because we were losing.
That's right.
And I thought, oh my goodness, things are going to change in football.
Change they did.
Indeed they did.
Not that year, but the year afterwards.
But let me tell another thing. The day I realized this had made big news was when the New York Times called me in my office at Carleton and wanted to interview me. Subsequently, I had interviews from the Los Angeles Times, the Detroit Free Press, the Chicago Tribune. That's the only time in my life. And I still remember, in 1977, the television stations were told they had to include some news in their cartoons. And so on Saturday morning, they had a little news clip for the week. They interrupted the cartoons and had it. And I got a call from a chemistry major a few years before who'd gotten his degree in medical school and was in a residency in Boston. And he called me up and he said, "Jerry, "You were on the Saturday morning cartoons." I think it was my 15 seconds of fame, probably. I certainly never made the Saturday morning cartoons another time in my life. But it got that kind of interest.
Yeah, and I'll make a comment about that in my wrap-up, because it ended up involving me as well in the news and the cartoons. Tom, as far as you were concerned, I know that this probably is sort of a small asterisk about the game, but you had two sons on that team. And certainly that can earmark or take you back to that time and how special it must have been to have Todd and Mark Porter, your two sons, on the team with you then.
Well, it was a 2-year period. There was Mark was 2 years older than Todd, so in this game, Mark was a junior playing quarterback, and Todd was a freshman playing some as a tight end. So those 2 years that both sons were on the squad were obviously unique and a time in my coaching career. And I would approach not only that game but those several years as being that how would you treat the situation of having your sons on your team, and that I was quite sure, positive, on my standpoint, that they weren't going to be favored.
Mm-hmm.
But I was equally concerned that they weren't going to be handicapped in any way by being the son of the head coach. And I think that they probably proved with their relationship with teammates that neither was the case.
Mm-hmm.
So it turned out very satisfactory.
Great. Bob Phelps was covering the game and a media person for St. Olaf during that time. I was in the press box, but as I've stated earlier, I was so wrapped up in getting the numbers right that I had to broadcast and being sure that I was giving the listening audience some comparison that they could understand. And I really don't know what was going on in that press box except in my narrow vision. What were your observations, Bob?
A couple of things about the press box. First, the guys in the press box, and in those days there weren't very many women in the press box, really got into the atmosphere of the game. The carnival kind of atmosphere, if you will, that all of you have described, because it got to be a kind of almost a carnival. It was still a serious game, but there were all these other ramifications to it. So I think a lot of the people who were covering the game in the press box played along with that, and they sort of forgot about or ignored any problems that might come about from having the different dimensions. And they sort of turned it into a featurey kind of coverage rather than a hard news coverage. So that was one thing. Mm-hmm. The other thing is that some of these people from, not necessarily from far away, but people were interested or were used to covering more, quote, high-powered, unquote, games. And the one I'll mention, he's a good guy, and you probably, some people will know him or have heard of him, Joe Soucheray, who at that time was a ranking sports writer for the Minneapolis Star-Tribune. And he would probably much rather have been covering the Gophers and the Buckeyes, who were playing the same day, same afternoon. And so he sort of reflected that sarcastic kind of thing. But even he got into it before the end and had a good time with it, really. So I think to sum up that part of it, the atmosphere in the press box wasn't greatly different, except that the people there sort of played down the serious football aspect of it, as it were, and got more into the uniqueness of it.
Well, again, I'm not sure that the New York Times or Chicago Tribune or any of those nationwide papers had actual staff members there, but were you aware that they were making phone calls, or did they have someone there to, like a ghostwriter from another news service, local news service, sending them reports?
I would be very surprised if there weren't stringers there from the larger places, particularly the wire services.
Okay.
So yeah, there were those things going on. And
Stringers being,
people who supply facts and figures to news outlets.
and they're hired by
Yeah.
people. Right. That would be my impression as well.
When the New York Times interviewed me, the man was really into the game. I think we talked for 45 minutes. And I said, gosh, you should come out and see it. It's quiet. Then I said, would you like to come out and see it? And he said, that won't be possible. Brown is playing Yale.
Yeah.
Have to have one's priorities.
Right, letting you know what the real priorities were. Jack, this is a question that came to me. As you began making these statements, you've already said, or making these arrangements for the game, you've already stated that you didn't realize how big this was going to become. In the beginning, it just sounded like a fun, happy idea, draw some interest. But as it began to mushroom, were you at all concerned about how Carleton might be portrayed in any of the news coverage?
Oh, not to any great degree. I think the novelty of it was a plus, any way you look at it. I mean, we were getting fantastic publicity. We were hearing from people all over the country, former Carleton luminaries, former presidents were calling and sending telegrams, and so I think it was a win-win situation for us, no matter how you look at it. No matter what impressions people might have of Carleton, it was still a happy occasion and a successful event, and it had a little different touch to the whole package, because it was it changed from being a crosstown rivalry football game to one of something brand new.
Mm-hmm.
So I think there was a different aura about it, but it was a positive aura.
Well, now, again, kind of heading toward the finish line here. Although we don't have to stop, I want any ideas that come to you that maybe aren't on this list of questions. But Tom and Bob, from St. Olaf's standpoint, you spoke eloquently about your participation. Are there any thoughts between the two of you that we haven't touched on that you can point to as being significant in your memories?
I don't have any, Dan, but I'll interject one thought here. The St. Olaf Carleton game is referred to as the GOAT game.
Mm-hmm.
All right? But if you look on the original GOAT trophy, it's one word. I'm correcting what a lot of media releases call it, GOAT trophy, two words. On the original trophy that's passed back and forth is one word.
Just GOAT?
GOAT trophy.
Oh, it's one word, GOAT trophy.
One team.
Oh my gosh, wow.
For future media use.
Okay.
And what about Jerry's question of, does metric football have a future?
Well,
Something like that.
we'll get back to that. I want to come back to
All
that
right.
too. But in your wrap-ups, Bob, how about?
You know, I think that a game like that, or an experience like that, because Jack talked about it being one of a kind, and it was. It does, things like that don't happen in bigger places, I think. And so when I think about that game, I almost think about it was a Norman Rockwell kind of thing. It was, as I recall, it was a beautiful day. And so here you had all of these young, exuberant students running around doing things that students do on Saturday afternoons. And I think that's one of the things that charmed some of the people who were covering that game in the press box. They weren't used to that kind of loose, informal thing. You know, they were more used to very serious kinds of Big Ten football. So this was something that they weren't used to, and they really got into it.
Well, you're certainly making a point that this is one of the few and rare places in the United States probably where this could have happened. Is that
Well, I think so,
fair?
and I think Laird Stadium is a picturesque kind of place. And so is Manitou Field, you know, the hills and the trees, and it's a little different than the bigger place, an enclosed bowl or something might be.
Well, getting back to the question to Jerry about having it be a metric game every year. What are the possibilities of that happening?
Oh, I would guess that ended when Carleton joined the MIAC. Then it would be a much trickier thing to do this. When we were in different leagues, and this was a game of long-term rivalry, but it didn't have immediate ramifications on the season. It was much easier to do once we became part of the same league.
Do you have any thoughts that this could ever possibly, the metric conversion would invade the United States and become the law of the land, so to speak?
Oh, I think it will happen. I really do. We're essentially the lone nation in the world that does not use the metric system.
Well,
And eventually it'll come, and then football will be, and maybe basketball, although football in the yards, the distance being so important, will be thought of as quaint, that it's using an old-fashioned system. If the whole nation takes over the metric system, I think this would have to be examined again. Do we take a sport that is so focused upon distance and what you do that it'll be seen strange, because school kids won't know about feet and yards anymore.
Mm-hmm.
They won't learn it in school.
Well,
But until that happens, I doubt if it'll occur.
so that would be sort of a math lesson for them eventually,
So-
in
so-
some far
yeah.
out future, to
Yeah.
go back and compare what the difference is.
One thing about this that I really liked is that Carleton and St. Olaf did it together. And all too often we think of ourselves as rivals but not working together on problems in town. And here was a case where we did something together that was everyone had fun doing, and we made it work as a team. And I think that's very important.
I'd like to pose a question. Would a change to the metric system in football be good or bad for football?
Gentlemen, any thoughts on this side of the table?
Well, let me digress a little bit, that I think that the reluctance to change would be somewhat in that, maybe not so much nowadays, but football is an American game. It isn't international the way some of the other sports are, swimming and whatever. Now it has grown some in the European countries, but it is an American game. So that, and I would sort of hide behind Dave Nelson, that was a long time chairman of the Rules Committee for football rules, and he said another obstacle would be none of us on the committee understand the metric system.
How do the Europeans play? Do they play metric? Because they don't use
That's a
yards.
good question. I'm not sure if I can answer that, Jerry. That with the European leagues now, that
Yes.
now we brought a part of a football team over to Norway in '88, I believe, and had a couple of exhibition games against club teams there, and the fields weren't marked out very accurately, but I thought there were yards. They might have been meters.
Well, once again, pointing to the fact that really there's not that much difference. The significance was that we were on our way to adopting
Right.
a metric system nationwide. And I don't know, again, if it became un-American as Jerry seemed to in 1980, after 1980, to think in those terms. Any other thoughts, Jack or Bob or Tom, Jerry? Covered a lot of it here.
I have one more story.
Oh, I'd like that.
In the spring of 1978, I got a letter one day from the Associated Colleges of the Midwest. Both of our colleges were part of that consortium. And they gave me a publicity award, which was the first annual Bricks Without Straw award. And you know, you can't make bricks of any substance unless you put straw in them to hold them together. So they saw it as a little bit of fluff. And maybe all good publicity has a little bit of fluff in it. It's possible.
Well, it certainly made a lot of people smile.
It did.
And brought wonderful attention to, I think, the other thing I liked about it, from my perspective, is it brought such great attention to D3 football.
Yeah.
And people playing for the love of the game, not for a scholarship, not for a career beyond, maybe coaching, perhaps, but certainly not playing beyond their college days. And so that was, to me, one of the great benefits of that game, that we saw that happen. Well, if anybody else has anything to say, speak now or forever hold your peace. I'm going to close with a couple of interesting stories, so I'm going to give you one last shot here. I think we're there. Well, as you have heard, I broadcast that football game, and I had called my cousin Sylvia Chase, who at the time was working for CBS television. And I said, we've got a great, she had just changed from CBS television to ABC television. And I saw it as a great filler at the end of a newscast nationally. And she said she would pitch it, but she said the newscast is pretty well set already, so I don't know if I could get it in. Okay, well, I dropped it. During the game, Tony Saffo from WCCO television came up and focused right in on me. And he had no idea what was going on the field, but I did. And of course, being the consummate performer I am, knew the camera was rolling and it was on me. And it was just off to my left, and I'm looking just off to my left in this action. And at that time, the Carleton quarterback dropped back to pass, and 4 St. Olaf linemen sacked him, right on top of him. And I said, oh my, that Carleton quarterback sure has a lot of kilograms on him now. And that's what they picked up. Now, fast forward a little bit. 2 things. Jerry, you've already alluded to the fact that it ended up in the news, but it also was picked up off of WCCO's auspices by Armed Forces Television and Radio. And I ended up in television broadcasts throughout the world. I got letters from Carleton alum from Japan and St. Olaf alums from all over the United States, Mexico, South America, that they had seen me on this newscast. One of them warning me never to allow that to happen again. He thought he'd left my face behind when he left Carleton and didn't want to see it anymore. I hope he was kidding. But the best story was about probably a month later, Jerry, I'm going to say, that in the news piece happened. It didn't happen right away, but it was a month, maybe a little bit more. And I was aware of it because my kids were watching Saturday morning television when this would come on. And all of a sudden it would be doodle, 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 in the news. Carleton and St. Olaf College recently played a metric football game, and instead of yards, and then they showed me doing the kilogram thing. So I thought, oh, that's fun. And I got down just for the tail end of it, and I thought, gee, I'd like to see that again sometime. Forgot about it. Went down to work at the Rubenstein, my restaurant at the time, and I was on Saturday nights, and it was crazy. You know, it was just one of the crazy Saturday nights that you have where you start working at 5 o'clock, and all of a sudden it's 11 o'clock, and you're not aware time has gone by. But this night, these 3 kids, 2 guys and a girl, walked in about 9:30 at night. And this girl just couldn't take her eyes off me. And I thought, wow, I must still have it. And so she smiled, we talked, and got up a beer, and we were visiting, and they turned out they had left Upper Peninsula of Michigan and driven all day to get to Northfield to see, and they were visiting some friends of theirs at Carleton. And so I go back to work, and she's still watching every move I make, and I'm thinking, wow, I better kind of quiet this down. Don't want to get anything started here. So I'm walking over to her. I'm walking over to her, and she said, "Did I see you on cartoons this morning?" The air went out of my balloon. But it was a wonderful reminder of how many people were affected and saw that piece. And when you go to that type of thing, you reach a whole new audience. And I hope the audience seeing this portrayal today remembers what a unique occasion it was, where 2 schools who have worked together for years, and at that time I think Jack and Jerry and Bob too and Tom, there was a growing together, I think, during the years of the 70s, where the schools were collaborating more and understanding that they could be much stronger, sharing their resources. So that's the part about the game that I love. It really brought Northfield together. It brought a lot of people closer to the game of football and D3 sports. I'm so glad that we could all get together today and reminisce about this. It gets to a point in life where that's about all you do. Just reminisce, and it's the best thing in the world to do. Thanks for coming down today. Tom Porter from St. Olaf, Bob Phelps from St. Olaf, and Jack Thurnblad and Jerry Mohrig from Carleton to reminisce about the metric football game played September 17th, 1977. I'm Dan Freeman.